Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our virtual assembly. My name is Tracy. I am with Senator Whitehouse's staff. We're very excited to welcome you all tonight and appreciate you joining.
Good evening, everyone.
We are going to be collecting questions tonight through the Q&A function on Zoom. So if you are in the Zoom room and want to add your name, your town, and your question, we will get to as many as possible. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Senator Whitehouse to start taking some of your pre-submitted questions, and we'll collect live questions as we go.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I know this is a time of considerable tumult and turmoil and real worry for people who have friends and family in the federal workforce and don't know whether or when an axe will fall, or who have records in federal databases that Elon Musk's little muskrats are prowling around in, or anybody who gets federal grants or benefits that are jammed up, or they have uncertainty about how jammed up they are. That is a lot of people. And then, just being worried about our country is pretty real. So I wanted to have this chance to engage a bit with all of you. And I am really glad that you have joined. Here, the strategy is in three major buckets. One is litigation. And a lot of Democratic groups, many of whom I have long relationships with and have worked with on other issues, are bringing lawsuits to try to stop some of the more flagrantly illegal behavior by Donald Trump. And bravo and kudos to our own Peter Nerona, who's been at the center of a lot of this. And do keep Judge Jack McConnell in your thoughts and prayers. He is being really set upon by the far-right MAGA attack machine in some pretty vile ways. I think he's doing his job just the way he should, but there's a lot of pressure on him. Even organizations that he's a part of are getting secondary harassment. So it's worth keeping a kind thought about Jack and his family right now. Beyond litigation, public engagement really matters. We've been very active, all of us in the Democratic side, with social media, with press, with events, because we really need, I think, to have people understand what is going on and what we can do about it, and create the kind of public pressure that will limit Trump's strength and constrain some of his more rash actions, and encourage the Senate Republicans who have not shown much spine to rally a bit and provide the counterweight that they're supposed to be. So the public engagement piece is very strong, and it's working actually pretty well. And Trump's numbers are starting to reflect that. The last piece is, even though we're in the minority in the Senate and in the House, there's still a fair amount that can be done through legislation and oversight. As the chairman of, or ranking member of the Environment Public Works Committee, we're constantly looking at EPA as a former U.S. attorney and the second senior member on the Judiciary Committee. We're constantly digging in to DOJ. We're sending letters asking for records and for answers. We're filing FOIA requests. We're very actively digging into what's going on over there. I think one of the things to understand is that behind all the chaos that Trump and Musk are creating, there's a lot of corruption going on. This is not being done for nothing. This is being done to help, for instance, the big fossil fuel interests that gave Trump well over $100 million for his campaign. 100 million was just what was declared. God knows what they gave him in secret money and dark money. There's the data theft, potential data theft that I mentioned already. Why are all these tech bros so interested in getting into these huge data sets like Social Security and healthcare payments and labor stuff? And then, of course, as we head into the reconciliation process, for them, it's always all about the billionaire tax cuts. And everything that they do to attack federal spending for regular families is a setup to provide them the runway room to do big tax cuts for billionaires who already pay way too little in taxes. So that's the frame that I see happening out there. It's kind of a little bit like an inside job being done by Russ Vought, who's a kind of the cranky guy who runs the very powerful Office of Management and Budget, Musk and his doggy crew, and the president himself. And the attack obviously is on separation of powers to try to ignore the judiciary and deny that Congress actually has the power of the purse, try to punish and humiliate and discourage any independent media coverage, which they're doing in innumerable ways, so that the fourth estate that ordinarily limits government behavior is compromised. And then, as we see at the FBI and at DOJ, trying to compromise impartial law enforcement so that the Department of Justice and the FBI become tools and weapons of the Trump political operation. We're pushing back hard against all of that. The last thing I'll mention before we go to questions is that I just got back from leading the Democratic side of the Munich Security Conference, and watching Trump and Vance say what they've been saying about Ukraine and about Russia is truly disgraceful. I always say we're in a clash of civilizations between rule of law countries and kleptocracies and autocracies and countries run by criminal groups. Well, the US has always been the shining beacon for the rule of law side of that clash. Now Trump is taking the side of Putin in that clash, lying and threatening, always in perfect alignment with what Putin would want him to do. Perfect alignment. So it's really distressing to see all of that going on. Trump Russia was a thing, is still a thing, and is going to continue to be a thing for us to focus on. It's one aspect of the corruption. So my team is here, and they're handing me questions as they come in. And the first one actually is from State Representative June Smeekman, who I like very much. Hi, June. Thank you for being on. What can we do locally to support your work in DC? Well, that's a question that I get a lot, as you can imagine. People feeling pretty anxious are, asking for advice. The three things that I say are, first, reach out to your contacts list and find people your friends, your family, even acquaintances that you think are aligned with you. And if they live in a state like Pennsylvania or Maine or Florida that has a Republican senator, urge them to make a call to that Republican Senate office. Republican Senate offices are getting flooded with calls, mostly about Elon Musk and his mischief, but about a lot of other things too, benefits that are stuck and so forth. So they're responding to that. They're feeling some heat. And the more you can use your contacts and your network to bring up that heat from their constituents, the better. The second is to, if you feel lonely in all of this, find groups to join. If you're an environmentalist, look for an environmental group that is active nationally to join. If you're interested in women's reproductive rights, make sure you're supporting Planned Parenthood. There's a group called Democracy Forward that is doing a particularly good job with the litigation and with pushing back on the Trump stuff. So if you don't have an idea, just take a quick look at Democracy Forward. I think you will like them. And the third thing is, a lot of this stuff is being done kind of out in fake narrative space, but it lands in real lives. So when you become aware of a real human consequence of what Musk and Trump are doing, elevate that. Elevate that to the newspaper, elevate that on social media, bring it to our attention so we can tell that story about how what they're doing is really hurting real people. So those are the three big things that I urge people to do. Also, I would say keep your spirits up. I'm looking here at my computer monitor, and I've got stickies stuck to it. And the three that cheer me on from Galatians: let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. So be not faint. Edmund Burke, never despair. But if you do, work on in despair. Don't let them break you. Work on even in despair. And then the French writer Camus, in the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer. So find within you the invincible summer and protect it and nurture it. On to Edward from Middletown. If the Trump administration openly defies the courts, what is Congress prepared to do? What is the next step? The next step in the courts, in the first instance, is for the courts to enforce their own orders. So let me give an example. The order that the blocked funds had to be released came out of our United States District Court in Rhode Island. It applied across the board. The first lawsuit on this had targeted a particular OMB directive to use that to unclog all the funding. And what the Trump rascals did is they just pulled that one directive, so there is no target left of the judicial order, but they didn't change anything. They kept the funds blocked. Judge McConnell wrote a very thorough order attaching to all different offices that were blocking funds. So they couldn't pull the trick of extracting a document, and they had to respond to it. And what they did was they retreated behind what I call the fog bank, stopped answering questions, wouldn't give a yes or no, went incommunicado on email or by the telephone, so that there was nobody saying no to releasing funding that could be the target of a court order or a contempt sanction, but none of the money was moving. They were still jamming it up. We're banging away at that through Congress, but obviously the courts are in a position to do that. And once they get a better handle on how the Trump administration is dodging the court orders, they can then fashion enforcement orders to require compliance or have contempt, even criminal contempt, of government officials who don't comply. As that begins to bite, then I think we'll see more and more compliance. If it doesn't, I really think they're going to start to lose a lot of support among sensible Republicans who think that obeying a court order is pretty important stuff. If you don't like it, appeal it, but you don't get to just disobey. And even Trump and many of his minions are saying the same thing. Oh, don't worry, we're going to obey court orders. So I think that's where we are on that. Obviously, legal proceedings take time. And Musk and his little muskrats, I don't know if you remember Cat in the Hat, thing 1 and thing 2, running around wrecking up the house. They're like thing 1, thing 2, and thing 500, running around wrecking up the house, and they're doing it fast. So it's going to be a little while before the courts catch up, but they will. And when they do, they can enforce their orders in a variety of ways. So Patricia from Hopkinton, I'm concerned for the future of Social Security and Medicare. As a senior, what is my best action plan to secure that I continue to receive my current benefits from these programs? I think we're going to be watching that pretty carefully. So far, they've been really, really cautious about saying they're going to do anything to cut Social Security or Medicare benefits. I think the worst danger right now is that the little muskrats rummaging around in Social Security's very complicated systems or in the very complicated disbursement automated systems the Treasury runs, inadvertently screw something up so that Social Security payments get bollocksed up, and it takes a while to put it back together. So far, that has not happened. I think it's Medicaid that is most in danger. The House budget measure that they're looking at right now would cut Medicaid by about 40%. And Medicaid pays for most of the births that happen at women and infants. It pays for most of our, parents and grandparents who are in nursing homes around Rhode Island. It pays for family members who are in opioid recovery treatment. It's really important to a lot of folks, and cutting it by 40% would be ridiculous. But I see that as where the danger lies. That and, screwing up the data systems, which is one of the reasons we've been after them so much on getting the hell out of the data systems. Roberta from Smithfield, why is our government not able to legally and physically block Musk from accessing all this sensitive government information? Well, that is because Musk is operating out of the White House with the apparent support of the president. And all of this data is held within the executive branch of government. Everybody reports to the president. And what the president says for them goes. Now, you've seen senior people quit senior positions, career people, the top career guy at Treasury quit, a senior official at Social Security just quit because they were being asked to do things that they thought were illegal and wrong. And so they refused to comply with the order. And they did so in a way that was highly visible to everybody. They said what they were doing and they did it. So that puts more of a spotlight on the mischief. But again, it's all being done in the executive branch of government. So Trump is responsible for this. Musk is responsible for this. And we need to hold them accountable with proper congressional oversight for all the mischief that they're up to. But there's no external force that can come in and prevent the executive branch from doing stuff that is directed by the president, other than what I talked about already, court orders. And we're piling up the court orders saying, no, get out of that database. You have no business there. You have no rights there. Suzanne from Kingston. Will Rhode Island receive its congressionally allocated funds from the Biden IRA and other mandated funding for the state? Some of it will probably be stopped by the new administration, but a good deal of it has already been distributed or already been obligated. We are fighting right now with the EPA and the Department of Justice for a nasty little stunt they pulled. There's an account of IRA money that's being held by Citibank as fiscal agent for all these different programs, so that when you're ready with your program, you draw from Citibank and the money is there for that purpose. It's already obligated to those projects. And they tried to set up a fake grand jury investigation so that they could use the fake grand jury investigation to suggest that there was some crime or misdeed going on in this Citibank bank account. I mean, it's just funds sitting there. There's nothing going on. But they used that because if they could assert that these funds were potentially being stolen or part of a criminal plan, then they could seize them and try to claw them back. So they've gone that far to try to interrupt the flow of funds that are headed to Rhode Island. Some of it's going to bust loose, I'm pretty sure. We're putting a lot of pressure on, for instance, highway stuff. The IRA stuff, they really hate, but the more damage they do to those funds, the more they hurt their own Republican senators and congressmen, because so much of the money went to red states. And the litigation is out there to force the hand of the transportation secretary or the Department of Commerce or whoever was the administrator. So we think that most of it will get through, and we're actively pursuing this problem of a fake grand jury investigation designed to block properly obligated funds for Rhode Island. Betsy from Lincoln. I have solar panels, I recycle, I compost, but in this new era, how do we work toward diminishing climate change, especially nationally and globally, and not just locally? Well, this is an area where I put in a lot of effort. The two things that can get us back on a pathway to climate safety are investment in direct air capture, because at this point, every remaining pathway to climate safety overshoots 1.5 degrees, overshoots our CO2 margins. So once you've overshot, going to zero doesn't help any longer. You've actually got to claw back the excess carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And direct air capture does that. There's technology emerging, there are facilities going on. It's actually a bipartisan thing. We just had a hearing in the Environment Public Works Committee, me and the Republican chairman, on carbon capture. So there's a lane for that. The other thing that is really important, even more important than direct air capture, is putting a price on pollution. So it's not free to pollute, because when it's free to pollute, it's really hard to stop. And the hook that we have right now, even in a Trump administration, for putting a price on carbon is the European carbon import tariff. They call it the CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It's law in the European Union. The UK is planning to follow up. So two huge economies tariffing big polluters who import into the EU and the UK. There's bipartisan work going on in the Senate that I'm in the middle of to try to do a US carbon tariff as well. Again, bipartisan. Once those tariffs are out there, at least there's a carbon price between countries, and that sends a signal into the countries that they have to clean up their act. It's truly the only way we're going to get China to clean up its carbon pollution. So I'm really fighting hard to protect the EU CBAM from any mischief and to make sure we try to do a good carbon tariff ourselves. If we really put a good solid price on carbon, then that can help turn the trajectory of climate our way. I'll also say that there are a lot of governors out there, particularly from blue states, who want to get stuff done. California is the 5th biggest economy in the world if it was a country by itself. So you add California, you add New York, you add Illinois, you add Pennsylvania, you add Michigan, you add smaller states. Once they start working together on climate stuff, they can set the market. They can set the policy because their footprints together are so big that it forces compliance, even if the Trump administration is up to no good. So, the fossil fuel industry bought Donald Trump early, and they're getting what they paid for in the terms of really corrupt shenanigans around carbon emissions. But there are plenty of ways to fight back through the states and internationally. And that's where my focus is, because there's room there. Russell from Pawtucket, are Democrats working on a coordinated counteroffensive? Well, I guess I'd say that the focus on, where I started, the focus on litigation and public communication and engagement and continued oversight and where possible legislation is the structure for a coordinated counteroffensive. As those of you know who've been following me closely, I have been fighting for a long time for us to have an operations center as a party, a war room. I had a continuing battle with the Biden administration about doing that. The Democratic National Committee actually wanted to do it, but couldn't get it cleared through the Biden administration. So there's a new chairman of the Democratic National Committee. He's talking about a war room all the time, Ken Martin. Jamie Harrison, his predecessor, wanted to do it. So it's not really a change in policy. It's just, the Biden folks didn't want it. And our campaign committees for the House and the Senate need to connect with that. So it's a cohesive war room, basically. If you go to really almost any military base anywhere, they've got an ops center, and you've seen them in TV shows. They got the TVs up on the wall, the satellite feeds come in, drone feeds come in. It's where they get the situational awareness of what's going on the ground. Everybody who's operating in that space has a desk. So you're deconflicting between the different units and nationalities operating in that space. And that's where you can design immediate tactical responses and also plan strategically. We don't have that. Crazily enough, Democrats don't have that, despite the fact that we're up against the biggest and most malevolent political influence operation in world history behind the Republican Party. So I think I have won that battle, but I've won the battle in theory. Now we just need to see the thing actually get built and become operational. Do any Republicans care about this behind closed doors? Oh, yes, they do. This is Mary. Oh, yes, they do. And one of the sad things for me, because I have some real friends on the Republican side, people I work with on stuff, is to watch them collapse under the pressure of Trump and Musk and the right-wing internet attacks. You've seen it in these nominees who are both disqualified and just personally discreditable people filled with conflicts of interest and evil intentions, but they all voted for them, except, of course, for Matt Gaetz, who was really too horrifying for anybody. But on the other ones, when a particular Republican came identified as an obstacle, then down came the forces of the really, really thuggish Trump operatives and the threats from Musk and his team to put a bounty of millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars on their heads in the next primary to take them out politically. And then again, what I call the flying monkeys, the far right folks who, in the anonymity of the internet, attack people through their social media and make really vile threats and just, try to just ruin their lives and make them as frightened as possible. And all of that together has been really, really terrifying. The test is going to be Ukraine right now. In Munich, all the Republican participants in our delegation, 10 strong, wanted to support Ukraine. The Republican House guy, who's the head of armed services, said Putin needs to lose in this negotiation, and everybody needs to see that Putin lost in this negotiation. So there's a lot of Republican sentiment to support Ukraine. And Trump crashing into this crazy stuff about, Zelensky's not being elected or having disappeared billions of dollars of money that our military has actually scrupulously tracked. The whole thing is really illegal. It's just unfair that he's doing this. It's false. It tracks perfectly the game plan of Vladimir Putin, and folks here know that. So there's going to be a big pushback around Ukraine. I hope this might be the thing where they can gather together in a sufficient number that there's no single head above the parapet to be attacked, and they can push back. That's the immediate test right now as to how Republicans behind closed doors might actually turn into real Republican opposition and not just spines of foam. How will the U.S. Senate support Ukraine given the Trump-Putin alliance? Well, that's a good related question from Kirsty. Kirsty, we still have appropriations and we still have oversight, and particularly where it's bipartisan, there's considerable effort that we can put forward, like the Munich Security Conference presence. We were a very strong bipartisan delegation of a considerable number of senators, including the chairs of Foreign Relations and Armed Services and the Republican chairs. And we sent a really strong message. Now, that didn't sink into Trump and it didn't sink into Vance, but it got out there. And we still have relationships over there. We can cooperate with the NATO countries. We can, work with the military folks who need our appropriations, who are subject to our oversight, to get the facts from them about what it is that they want to do. So there's a good deal that we can do. And I think it helps to call out the president when he's spouting Vladimir Putin's falsehoods. I mean, that shouldn't be. The point I'll close with here on this is that if you go all the way back, Trump got elected with Russia's help. That was the finding of the Mueller report run by the former head of the FBI. That was the finding of a bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee report. After all of that came out and all the different contacts with Russians, they went into denial mode and would constantly say, Trump Russia is a hoax, Trump Russia is a hoax, Trump Russia is a hoax. And we talked about other things. So their narrative propagated, but Trump Russia was never a hoax. Trump Russia was always real. It stayed real through that whole thing. The Russians helped him in this race as well. And now he and Putin are just married exactly to each other. Pretty much everything that he does serves Russia's interests in various ways. Kash Patel probably got the job by threatening to take down what he called the intel shops, the groups in the FBI that take on Russia. Pam Bondi, the first thing she did was shut down the klepto capture and anti-kleptocracy work that was targeting Russian oligarchs. Tulsi Gabbard, the new DNI, has a long record of palling around with Russia and spouting Russian talking points. So there's a lot to keep an eye on in this Trump-Russia relationship right now. Virginia from Westerly, what can be done to stop the tax cuts for the wealthy? They've got to do these tax cuts through reconciliation. That's the budget process in the Senate that lets you pass something with only 50 votes. And they've got to have the same bill go through the House. And right now, they're all bollocksed up. The Senate could only pass half of the reconciliation bill. They were going to come back to do another half later. And then the president said, no, don't do the Senate bill, do the House bill. But then the House can't do its bill because it's not organized and it doesn't have the votes yet. So we're going to go forward tomorrow with a partial Senate reconciliation bill that the president has already said he doesn't support. Go figure. So they're already in a lot of tumult about it. In the early stages of reconciliation, all the Budget Committee is doing and all the Senate is doing is passing instructions to the different committees as to the number that they're supposed to hit in terms of budget effect, whether it's increasing or decreasing the budget. The actual legislating of that gets done in the committees. So they're already in trouble over the proposed cuts to Medicaid because you can deduce from what their numbers are where they have to go based on what account they're in, what committee territory they're in. So we know the outlines already, but when they actually have to get specific and pass a law that makes huge cuts to Medicaid, it's going to be really difficult. And so they're, I think, in real political trouble. And I think it's very hard for them to push through the kind of really savage cuts to people's benefits and to programs that really help regular people, veterans programs, for instance, VA hospitals around the country, for Pete's sake, to do all of that horrible stuff to give tax cuts to billionaires. Nobody likes either side of that equation except Republicans. The cuts are unwelcome and really harmful to American families. And the beneficiaries are people who already don't pay any hardly damn taxes, and they should have their taxes go up, not down. So we've got a long fight ahead of us on that, but we've got good field position to win that fight because the public is really with us. So thank you, Virginia from Westerly. Sue from Narragansett, a teacher. Thank you, Sue. I'm very worried about the potential dissolution of the Department of Education. Can you speak to Trump's ability to do that? What can be done to help Rhode Island students? Well, in the same way that you can block funding coming out of other agencies, for a while anyway, Trump can block the grant funds that come to Rhode Island to help things like kids who have special education needs. And that's part of the litigation that's already going on. So, we'll fight our way through that. That's one piece of it. The second is to put somebody in charge like Linda McMahon, who comes out of TV wrestling and couldn't give a red hot damn about education, and whose job is from the inside to try to wreck up the department, just so it doesn't work right and things get fouled up and things get blocked and, everything just freezes up, seizes up. So I think they might try to do that as well. We'll have to be very watchful about that. The notion that the president can take an agency that Congress has established by law and undo that without coming back to Congress, that just isn't law. You just can't do that. So I think, a little bit like sending the muskrats into these places to try to do as much damage as they can, like thing 1, thing 2, thing 3, thing 500, before the law catches up with them. That's the real danger. But there's a reason that Congress is Article 1 in the Constitution and the president is Article 2. Congress has the power because Congress represents the public and has to hear from the public regularly. And that's why we're going to assert our voices in this space. How effective do you think the rallies being held at state houses are? I think they're pretty effective. I think it's important. First of all, I think it's important for people who are upset to be able to go someplace and express how upset they are, and to find other people who share their feelings of anxiety and anger and know that you're not alone. When you're stressed and frustrated, it's good not to feel alone. So that's a good thing all by itself. I think it also shows that people are taking notice, that you can't send your little Musk minions rummaging around, smashing things up in government agencies illegally without people caring. We're not going to sleep through this one. This actually really matters. I think the important thing here is that the rallies and the protests need to focus on where the problem is. And that is on the Republican side of Congress. In the House districts that are letting Trump get away with this, in the Senate states with Republican senators that are letting people get away with this, if we turn our anxiety and anger into what President Obama used to call a circular firing squad, where we're spending our time quarreling with each other, we have completely taken our eye off the ball. We will lose momentum, and the focus really needs to be on the corruption, the looting of the federal treasury for the billionaires, and the pollution connection that's behind so much of the corruption. And if we can keep the focus on that, then I think the rallies are a really important expression of that. So God bless everybody who went out and rallied. Thank you. Justine from Cranston, do I believe that we are in a constitutional crisis? We're damn close if we're not in one. I think what we are right now is in a constitutional violation. Trump is violating the Constitution all the time. And that's why court after court after court after court has said, stop it. That's illegal. That's unconstitutional. They're losing all the time because what they're doing is, in fact, illegal. And the manner in which it is illegal is usually because it's actually in violation of the Constitution. It's not just some statute. Sometimes it's a statute that they're violating. Often it's the actual Constitution. So we are in a constitutional violation by the President of the United States, which is a sad thing, sickening thing to have to say. It becomes a crisis when he refuses to obey court orders. And that's the crunch time that we're closing in on. And we'll see how that goes. As I said, there are plenty of ways that a court can find to enforce its orders. But when you have the executive branch in our separation of powers government saying the prime function of Congress to decide what to spend and where to spend it actually belongs to me. And the prime function of the judiciary to say when you're in violation of the law and when you're in violation of the Constitution is actually something I'm not going to listen to. That's a very, very sorry and angering state of affairs. So I would say constitutional violation and perhaps constitutional crisis. We'll see how they respond to court decisions. Pete from Bristol, what are you doing to make sure our 2026 elections are free and fair? Well, that's a very good question because the Trumpsters have gone into some of the federal government organizations that protect the integrity of our elections and busted them up. So we're not really close yet to the 2026 elections. We have lawyers working full time to fend off all the various attacks on elections that are constantly being brought by the front groups for the billionaires. So, litigate, keep the spotlight on, and work to try to make sure that the federal resources that keep our elections safe are there. But a watchful eye is really going to matter. And this Trump-Russia thing I'll say it again. It is real. Trump Russia is an actual thing. They've meddled in 2 elections for him already. Why would they not meddle in 2026 when they're getting everything they want from Trump right now, as if Putin was writing the menu? And a Democratic House in particular would be a massive counterweight and a huge investigative opportunity to dig into this stuff that would bring to an end the servitude, really, of Trump to Putin in this space. So when you're looking at our 2026 elections, don't forget Trump Russia is real, and they've already meddled in the 2020 and 24 elections. How do we reach people who voted for Trump? Well, respectfully, I guess I would say, I think, you jerk, how did you vote for this idiot? Is probably not the way to proceed. But I will tell you, my phone calls and correspondence includes people who are saying, hey, I voted for this guy. I feel terrible about it now. How do you help this? So I think there's some buyer's remorse happening about Trump. And the more we focus on how these things that he's doing here in Washington, sort of far removed from the public, are actually landing in people's lives, and the more people who voted for Trump feel that we're listening to them and that they can come to us and we can help them with their problems and try to solve this, and that maybe by 26, they should be thinking about voting a different way. I think that's the best way to do it. People, I don't know anybody who voted for Trump so that he could take Vladimir Putin's side in the Ukraine war. I don't know anybody who voted for Trump so that he could set Elon Musk and his little minions loose in our federal healthcare data systems and our Social Security data systems. I don't know of anybody who voted for Trump so that he would violate a court order, that he would break the rule of law with respect to our federal courts. So I think a lot of the stuff that he is doing simply was not on the program. By the way, a lot of it was cost. Remember how much he talked about rising prices and Biden inflation, all that stuff? Guess what's been up since he became president? Eggs, insurance, coffee. Inflation is actually accelerating under Trump. So I think there's a lot of reason to regret a vote for Donald Trump if that was your issue. Marco, other than formal impeachment, is there any other mechanism to remove a sitting president? Well, there used to be, if he was really evil, arresting him as a criminal and letting the vice president take over. But the Supreme Court cooked up their executive immunity decision, which I still think was completely unfounded and fabricated. The other way is I want to say the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, which lets a majority of the cabinet declare the president to be incapacitated, incapable of carrying out his functions. Of course, if that happens, the next up is J.D. Vance, and I don't know how much better he'd be. And Trump chose his cabinet not for ability, not for decency, but for loyalty, fealty to him as an individual. And so it's going to be a long, long series of events before this cabinet chosen for Trump's servience is going to be in a position to take advantage of that. So that brings it back to impeachment. But if we win in 26 in the House can commence really serious investigations. They can open an impeachment inquiry. And now you're looking under the hood behind all the lies that we're being told. You're bringing in people, you're subpoenaing people, you're getting out documents, you're doing your job of really robust oversight. And I think that can make a very, very big difference in containing his behavior. Is the Supreme Court going to give Trump carte blanche to do anything he wants? Boy, I'd like to say no, but I actually thought that the decision about presidential immunity was going to be 9-0 in our favor. I thought the court would say, this is such an easy slam dunk that we're going to show unity. We're going to do a 9-0 decision. And we're going to say, of course, in a nation of laws, the president, like everyone else, is subject to the laws, which actually was the law already from the Nixon cases. So I was dead wrong about that. Trump's behavior is so aberrational right now that he might have put a scare into people like Chief Justice Roberts. And where you're dealing with Trump violating the judicial power, then they have a real interest in defending it. They may be happy to take away Congress's power and shove that over to the executive branch, but they have done a lot to try to expand the judicial power. And I think we'll have to see, but I think there's a good shot that they'll at least protect the integrity of court orders and the enforcement of court orders. But as I said, boy, was I wrong about the immunity thing. And so hard to guess. If they follow the law, yes. If they go off on Trumpian right-wing billionaire adventures, hard to tell. MJ from Jamestown, what are realistic opportunities for bipartisan work in 2025? Well, I think, supporting Ukraine is one. In the Appropriations Committee, Senator Collins of Maine and Senator Murray of Washington, the Republican and the Democrat, have reached pretty close to agreement on the numbers for each of the appropriations committees to build an appropriations bill up to how much will get spent. So we'll see if the Appropriations Committee, which is often quite bipartisan, is able to do that. In my committee, the Environment and Public Works Committee, we're working in bipartisan fashion on carbon capture, and we've had a hearing about that already. We had a hearing today on permitting reform, and we're already working with our Energy Committee colleagues, because it's a two-committee jurisdiction, to try to see what we can put together on permitting reform. That can only be bipartisan. As I said in my remarks to everybody today, though, we're ready to go forward. There's a bipartisan bill to be had here, but there is zero chance that I will support a permitting bill while President Trump is still running around breaking the law. Because why would I agree to a bipartisan permitting bill if the only part that he liked was the part that built Keystone Pipeline and he didn't obey the rest of the law? He wouldn't help build transmission lines because he thinks he doesn't have to faithfully execute the laws. So even the areas where there's room for bipartisan progress are presently in a jam because the president has shown that he won't faithfully execute the laws despite having taken the oath to do so just a month ago. Greta in Providence, what are Dems doing about the propaganda going on in mainstream media, and how can we use press to spread the truth? I think Democrats have been operating at a considerable disadvantage for a while. For one, we don't have a captive news station like Fox News. For two, we don't have a massive propaganda development operation like all the 100 front groups that are pushing out climate denial and other Republican talking points. Three, we didn't have the message discipline that the Republicans have had. And four, we weren't even on many of the new platforms where people get information. We weren't hardly on TikTok at all. We weren't on influencer channels. We weren't, doing podcasting at the rate that they were. So we're trying to improve across all of those different arenas and do a lot better in that regard. So I think we can dig a big dent in their propaganda advantage. But it's really important that we do so. And it's frustrating because this is one of the things that I've been barking about for years. And now, here we are. Alice, what is being done to protect the CFPB? Well, as you can imagine, Elizabeth Warren is all over that since that was her baby. There has been a court order that they can't destroy files with the CFPB and that they can't destroy it or take it over. That's established by statute and has to be run. They installed Russ Vought, the scoundrel who is running the Office of Management and Budget, as its acting chief. And all he wants to do is destroy it. So he's like the world's worst person in the world to run that. I think, even if they knock it down, this is a entity that was able to get Wall Street primarily to repay cheated consumers $21 billion. $21 billion. So you can see why Wall Street billionaires want to go to the corrupt Trump administration and get rid of this thing because it made them pay back the people they cheated. And $21 billion is a pretty fair piece of change. But the record of the Consumer Financial Protection Board is so good that even if they tear it up for a couple of years, Senator Warren's idea was an idea whose time had come, and there will be a revival, and if they do their very best to wreck it for a while. It's just too necessary. So, Erin from Richmond, how do you plan to support federal workers and stop these illegal firings? I think, calling out what's going on, digging in through oversight as to what's happening, and supporting the litigation about the firings are all important. I think a lot of our spotlighting function can be helpful when you're looking at people who do handle nuclear material and nuclear devices being fired. Doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Air traffic controllers, when we're already short on air traffic controllers being fired, hard to justify that. People who work in our national parks, hard to justify that. And then one of the ways they've been doing this is that if you're in probationary status, they say that they can fire you readily because you're in probationary status. But some people are in probationary status because they've done such a good job that they got promoted to a new job. So they're in probationary status for the new job because they did such a good job in the agency. And so to fire them really makes no sense. So we really want to make sure that when people are put in that situation, when they are smeared by being told that their work was no good, their performance was insufficient, when in fact they got outstanding performance ratings and got promoted, that's reputational harm. You can sue over that. So we're trying to make sure that anybody who feels that they've been cheated in this process, which is a lot of people, know that they can have access to lawyers, ideally class action lawyers, so that the fees are spread widely, so that you can begin to claw your way back from the cruelty and injustice of a lot of these firings. Janine wants to know, what is the legislative branch doing to counter Trump's positions on DEI and the LGBTQ plus community? A lot of litigation still. There was an interesting case just yesterday, I want to say, in Virginia, where they were trying to defend the DEI and LGBTQ plus community attacks. And the judge gave the government a really, really hard time about the attacks on these individuals being founded on animus, i.e., hatred, dislike, basically. And animus is not a legal reason to remove someone. And so it was a very, very good hearing in a fairly conservative area down in Virginia. It made my ears perk up because it was UVA Law School that was involved, and that's where I went to law school. So I think the litigation work that is being done both by the attorneys general and by other groups, I don't think this was the attorneys general, I think this was another litigating group, is very good. And, in the same way that Trump flooded the zone by doing all this horrible stuff at once to try to make it all happen so that people couldn't keep track, with enough litigation groups, you can flood the zone back. And now they have to defend all this stuff in a whole bunch of places. It's not just knocking over stuff. It's now you got to go and explain it. And so as a lawyer, I think this is one of the great moments for lawyering. Tara asks, do you have advice on keeping the endurance to fight on local levels for the next 4 years? I am protesting, sending letters, etc., and already exhausted. Well, first of all, Tara, thank you. That is terrific that you're doing that you're not curling up in the fetal position and you're out there pressing. I think if we press hard enough, it may not be the next 4 years so much as the next 2 years, because once there's a Republican House to do real investigations and really dig into this stuff and push bills through and stop bad legislation from happening and prevent reconciliation bills that hurt regular taxpayers to help greedy billionaires, things change a lot. So I think focusing on battleground states in House districts as well as Senate seats is a very important thing to do. Keep your spirits up. In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer, Camus' phrase. Nurture your own internal invincible summer. As Edmund Burke said, if you despair, work on in despair and faint not, as the Bible says in Galatians. And also know you're not alone. There's so many people who feel the same way. And I hope that this call, which has had well over 2,000 participants just in this 1 hour, is a sign that we are not alone in trying to fight back and reclaim our country. We are not going to become an autocracy under Trump. We just aren't. We're not going to roll back the clock on all the developments in civilization that we have made in the last 50 years. We are not going to let all this corruption go unchallenged and ultimately unpunished. And all around you, Tara, are people who feel the same way, who are just as upset, but together we can carry on. And together we can make this right. And 2026 is not that far away. And when it comes, if we're successful, a whole new vista emerges for us out from under the evils of Trump and his ghastly minions. So it is going to be tough. It is going to take hard work. We do have to really dig in together, but we can do this. We can do this. So thank you all so much for joining me. With all that's going on, we didn't talk quite as much about what's coming from climate change as I would like. Ernie Shigalian, our insurance agent here in Rhode Island, who I brought down to testify, has been in the press recently. Very good alerts about what's coming. That's going to hit Republicans hard when homeowners insurance becomes a nightmare in everybody's pocketbook. And people understand that the reason home insurance is a nightmare in everybody's pocketbook is because Republicans, and Trump specifically, lied about climate change for years while taking huge amounts of money, often secret money, from the fossil fuel industry. That's not a good story to have to tell. And so that's just one example of ways we can make sure the public understands what's at stake and help us take the House back and maybe perhaps take the Senate back in 2026. So thank you, everybody, for joining, and keep your faith up. I'm always proud to be a Rhode Islander when I can participate in events like this, and thanks for joining. Take care.